Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Andrea Bender. I'm the Vice President of External Affairs for the School Construction Authority. I'm here with lots of members of my team to talk about a new school proposed for Northern Greenpoint at 257 Franklin Street. For anyone who was in attendance at the meeting we held at PS 31 back in December, this is going to look familiar to you. Um, if you didn't have your questions answered, then please feel free to ask us tonight. We're happy to answer your questions. With me tonight is Mike Sherwood, who is an expert in all things hazmat and has been our point of contact on all of our environmental testing at 257 Franklin Street. He'll be giving you the meat of the presentation a little bit later. And Ben Goodman, who will be giving you some background information on the need for school seats in the area, and the way that SCA kind of goes about handling the need for new school seats. Just for background, we're going to get through the first 6 or 7 slides of the deck, which are all about the need in the community and a little background on the site, which Bennett's going to give, and then we're going to pause for questions. If you have a question, you can please feel free to either raise your hand and we'll call on you, or if you would prefer, you can use the Q&A to type your question and we will read it out to the group. After we take questions at the break after slide 7, Mike will take over the presentation with some of the more technical pieces, all of the more technical pieces, really. And we're going to do our best to get all the way through the end of the presentation and then take questions. If it just gets to be too much, we'll pause in between and take questions. We know that this is very dense material, and a lot of stuff. So please raise your hand as soon as you have a question. We'll answer it. We want to make sure that folks feel like all their questions are answered. And everyone has a chance to participate with us tonight who can answer questions for items that are targeted toward them. Our partners from New York State DEC, New York City Mayor's Office of Environmental Remediation, the New York City Department of Health, and our partners at Madison Realty Capital are also here. I'm seeing a couple of our elected officials come into the room. Before we turn it over, if any of the elected officials would like to speak, please raise your hand. I'm happy to unmute you to say a few words at the start here. I see Councilmember Rustler's hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Councilmember. Give me 1 second. Okay, now you should be able to unmute your mic, Councilmember.
Okay, great. Oh, great. Okay, sorry about that. So thanks, Andrea and the team from SCA, and just want to thank everybody else for being on from the community. I think we were hoping to have a little bit of a bigger turnout tonight, but we'll continue to solicit input from neighbors, and hopefully people can share the information they received this evening with other concerned folks in the community. I'm currently out on leave, but wanted to just pop in for a moment because this is such an important issue to me and to the Greenpoint community. It's been 20 years almost that we've been, you know, fighting over the future of this site. And there's been a lot of concern in the community over an extended period of time because of the state Superfund site at Newhart across the street. And now that that site has been, largely cleaned up, it warrants us having a community conversation about whether we think this is a safe and appropriate site for a school. The School Construction Authority and the other environmental agencies that are on here feel very much that it is a safe and appropriate site for a school. And, the position that I've taken, and I think the other elected officials in our community have taken, is that we really want to hear from neighbors and from the community about whether you agree. And the school is only going to work if families want to send their kids there and feel safe sending their kids there. I think that there's a lot of really good progress that's been made on the cleanup of the site. And I thought the presentation that has been made to me and my team previously, and that was made at PS 31 a few weeks ago, was compelling. But ultimately, we really are eager to hear from neighbors that you agree and that you think that this is a reasonable path forward. And so my team, Angela from my team, our district director, who's great, is on the call. She'll be listening carefully. We'll be actively soliciting folks' feedback and charting a path forward together. Like I said, this only works if the Greenpoint community is supportive, and we desperately need a new school. For folks who live in Blue Slip or at the northern tip of Greenpoint, they're walking a mile plus to take a 4 or 5 year old to school at PS 31. That doesn't make any sense. That's not right. Um, and we've seen enormous growth in our neighborhood, and we have the demand for a new school so that 31, 34, and 110 aren't all overflowing. And I know the SEA and DOE want to work with us to make this a success, but the gatekeeping issue, the reason we're so focused on robust and rigorous community engagement is because we want to hear from you all about whether you feel safe and you think that this site works. So with that, I'll kick it back. We appreciate the chance to say hello and hope everyone has a good evening and enjoys the conversation.
Thank you, council member, and
Thank you.
congratulations to you and your family. I do not see any other elected officials with hands raised. So please, if you are here and I don't see you, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak, if you are an elected official. Otherwise, I will go ahead and turn things over to Ben Goodman on my team, who will kick us off.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you, Councilmember Ressler, and all the community members, and parents who are with us this evening. We're glad to restart this conversation about a new school in Greenpoint. The new school is located at 257 Franklin Street. Next slide, please. So we believe this proposed school site is a candidate for a new public school. It is in the Greenpoint section of Brooklyn, as we're all aware, in District 14. We are going to, of course, do questions and feedback, as Andrea mentioned. We are also going to provide an update on the New Heart site and as well as the cleanup progress. And we will review the environmental investigations on the site and show the results and propose remedies. We also will discuss the next steps if we do have support to move forward with the new school for Greenpoint. Included in the next steps is the city's voluntary cleanup program, and we'll discuss the timeline and public engagement with that, and of course, solicit questions and feedback. So the three elementary schools are, as folks are probably aware, closest to our site are PS 31, 34, and 1110. As Councilmember Ressler mentioned, many who live in the neighborhood, as I'm sure folks are really familiar, as the councilmember mentioned, it is quite a long walk to PS 31. And when you're walking, with a younger student, it takes quite an amount of a long time. Additionally, the schools are overutilized. The existing enrollment at each school, which is shown here on the chart, all of them are very close to 100% capacity or even overutilized at the moment. And we expect that trend to continue in Greenpoint as many new residential units continue to be built. Next slide, please. So this map shows where our proposed site is located. The proposed site is the yellow star on the north end of Greenpoint. The three other flags represent the other three district elementary schools, 31, 34, and 110. So as most folks are aware, longtime residents of Greenpoint do travel outside the neighborhood with their children. And we believe a new school would provide all residents with a new option for a brand new standalone primary school that is close by. So this here is the site at 257 Franklin Street. It's block 2494 of Lot 20 in Greenpoint. It's the southwest corner of Franklin and DuPont Streets, and it's approximately 20,000 square feet. So to get into a little bit more details, though keeping in mind we have not started design as of yet, We do anticipate that it will be a 450-seat elementary school, likely will be 5 to 6 stories tall with a play yard. Important to note that the building itself would be slab on grade. That means without a basement or cellar due to the shallow groundwater. And we'll discuss in more detail later in the presentation why that fact is very important. Additionally, the school will, of course, be fully ADA accessible, fully air conditioned, in addition to being a fully electric building. We will look to pursue additional measures to design a building that is as sustainable as possible. So in a brief moment, we will discuss the engineering controls and environmental actions that are robust and that the SCA would implement as part of our construction. And it's important to note that these controls go above and beyond what is required by code. And they are actual SCA standards that we've developed over many years and have implemented in many schools that we build. So to discuss the new school site advantages for this particular site, we of course recognize that it has had its challenges due to proximity to the Newhart site. We're going to discuss in more detail in a few moments um, those challenges. But however, in terms of planning for a new school, the site truly does have a lot to offer. It is outside the flood zone and would not require elevation at the street level. And in construction, this is very important. There are utility connections available. Both for pickup and drop off, there are street frontages on both Franklin and DuPont streets that provides access for students and families for the yellow bus service, for arrival and dismissal, and for other school activities. So the immediate area was also a residential community with community amenities um, nearby. Additionally, to note, perhaps most importantly, through community advocacy, DEC, our partners at the State Department of Environmental Conservation required a deep hydraulic barrier wall to be designed and installed in 2023 to prevent the migration of contaminants from the nearby Newhart site. Also important to note, as I'm sure folks are aware, our schools frequently serve as community hubs because they're modern, fully accessible, and fully air conditioned. Our schools serve as boating locations, meal distribution centers, location for weekend rec activities, and have also served as cooling centers in the summer months. So at this point in time, it's important to note that the community did ask us to wait on this school site until the Newhart site had been cleaned up and progress had been made towards addressing the environmental concerns. And we do agree that this was the right approach. However, today the landscape looks different. The Newhart site itself did go through a grueling remediation overseen by our colleagues at DEC. Soon, the site itself will welcome its residents, and we have conducted additional environmental testing on our proposed site, which we will share with you this evening. And with the proposed actions that we'll discuss shortly, we do hope the community can feel comfortable supporting the site. At this point in time, before turning it over to my colleague, Mike Shoreward, who's a licensed New York State geologist, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I also want to give a quick shout out to Samir Talati, who's here from Superintendent Centrone in School District 14. He's joined us this evening. Just wanted to say thank you for joining us. Welcome. Does anyone have any questions about what's been presented so far? I think we can keep going.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Andrea. Okay, so this is going to get into the details. We'll try to get through it as Andrea said, and if any questions or significant number of questions come up along the way, we can certainly stop. So this is our site in the lower left-hand corner of the proposed school. It's pretty, it's not a very interesting site other than its proximity to Newhart, which is shown here, cross corner from the site in the upper right. Shown with a pink highlight, that is the sheet piling that was installed around that site prior to its remediation. The hydraulic barrier that Ben mentioned is shown in pink here, and that starts below the sidewalk and goes down approximately 25 feet and provides additional layer of protection for our site. The borings shown in black are the borings that the SCA conducted in 2008 and in 2023, 15 years apart. The green wells and borings are wells installed as part of the Newhart site investigation remediation. This actually doesn't even do it justice. There's now many, many more recovery wells all along these sidewalks here, but needless to say, there are a lot of wells in the neighborhood, as you might have noticed. The original dimensions of the phthalate plume, which is the main thing we're going to be talking about here, are shown with this circle. Obviously, the Newhart site is already being cleaned up, and most of our discussion will focus what has gotten away from the site and is in underneath the streets and sidewalks under Franklin and DuPont streets. I want to note that based on observations on our site, on the Newhart site, and other sites and environmental regulatory programs across the neighborhood, groundwater flows in north-northwesterly or a west-northwesterly direction towards the water up in this direction, sort of 90 degrees from our site. And that's important to note when we're talking about this NAPL plume, non-aqueous phase liquid or product that's underneath the site about 12 feet below the ground surface. So if you were standing at the sidewalk of Franklin and DuPont streets, this material that we're talking about would be 12 feet below your feet. It's not accessible. People cannot come into contact with it readily because you'd have to either dig a 12-foot hole or you'd have to pump water or access a well. And this material is not volatile in nature, so it doesn't create a vapor intrusion concern. I want to also note that these NAPL plume dimensions have remained relatively stable over time. DEC has been monitoring this material and groundwater around the site since 2012, and the dimensions have stayed pretty much stable the entire time. Even after Hurricane Sandy, the dimensions of this plume stayed the same and did not change. Sorry, I'll go back one. We're going to now show a cross-sectional view of our site from A to A prime to give you an idea of what's going on below the ground surface. So obviously on the left-hand side here, this is the proposed school site. This is the hydraulic barrier that Ben mentioned going down to 25 feet. The blue line is where groundwater is found, 12 feet below the ground surface. On the right is the former Newhart site, sort of showing pre-remedial conditions on the right, their hydraulic barrier. And in between is the city streets of Franklin and DuPont, where we're going to talk about this material in particular that's underneath the streets and sidewalks. All of this has been now remediated successfully. It was a tremendous effort, and all of the tanks that leaked and created the phthalate plume that's shown in blue here. This has all been excavated to about 19 feet. All that material came out, contaminated soil. They pumped groundwater, and they also solidified from about 19 to 25 feet below the ground surface. Using a process called in situ solidification, where they basically turn the bottom of the excavation into a giant concrete block, if you will. So basically what we're left dealing with is what is in the street here, because all of this has now been addressed. So we performed 2 investigations as mentioned. This particular slide focuses on what we did in 2023. Our borings here were designed to meet OER's requirements as far as spatial distribution, number of samples, types of samples, analyses, etc., and include soil, groundwater, soil vapor samples. I'll call your attention to SB03 in the very corner. We got as close to this corner with the drill rig as we possibly could. Obviously, because this is the corner closest to the Newhart sites, we wanted to see if any Newhart contaminants of concern had crossed over our property line and onto our property. And just to give you a summary of what we found at this SB03, in the first 4 feet, we found historic fill material, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, but it's very commonly found throughout New York City and typically has metals and semi-volatile organic compounds in it. We also collected a sample from 10 to 12 feet just above the groundwater interface, and that sample did not have any VOC, SVOCs, metals, PCBs, or pesticides exceeding regulatory comparison criteria. We also sunk a well in this location and collected a groundwater sample, and the groundwater sample did not have any SVOCs, VOCs, metals, or PCBs above regulatory criteria. The only thing that we detected slightly above background is, or within background, was PFAS compounds, which are an emerging contaminant that is unrelated to the Newhart site and is consistent with background conditions. So with regard to our findings at our site, I mentioned that we found pretty much the same thing in 2008 and 2023. There were no changes over that time, suggesting that our site has not been impacted by anything in the intervening 15 years. I did mention we found shallow historic fill material. Historic fill is very common across New York City. It is excess material from tunneling, dredging, waste incineration that's imported to a site to raise the site elevation in order to allow for site development. In New York City, this was very common because New York City was historically very much covered with low-lying marshes that were filled in order to build up the site elevation and allow for site development. This is quite common from the 1800s until the 1960s when environmental regulations were first adopted. We find historic fill and shallow material on almost every site we investigate in New York City across all 5 boroughs. Historic fill generally, as I said before, contains SVOCs and metals above regulatory comparison criteria. This often has to do with the fact that it contains some ash material within it. It generally is not a source of VOCs, as was the case here, and so is not a concern for vapor intrusion or that sort of thing. So what else did we find in addition to historic fill? We also confirmed the presence of an underground storage tank on our site. We first identified it in 2008. When we did that investigation, we confirmed its presence as part of our 2023 investigation. And again, we found no Newhart contaminants of concern in soil above regulatory comparison criteria. So what do we plan to do with regard to soil? Much of this is very standard. It's in all of our SCA specs, like any material that's going to be taken off site will have to be properly characterized prior to off-site, prior to excavation and off-site disposal. Any fill material that will be brought onto the site will need to meet the definition of environmentally clean fill, consistent with DEC general fill criteria, which is an SCA standard. We will implement community air monitoring and dust suppression during all ground intrusive work. Because the site is E-designated, this is an OER requirement for this site. We will register the tank that we found with the DEC, clean, remove, and dispose of all waste off-site. And in the event that we have any exposed soil on our proposed school site at the end of construction, we would propose putting 2 feet of environmentally clean fill over any exposed soil areas if it's not paved by like asphalt concrete, which is also an SCA standard. Some pictures on the right. These are some of our recent remedial sites. M502 is an E-designated site. This is the community air monitoring equipment that we use during any sort of ground intrusive work on any of our sites and regulatory programs. So this slide is going to summarize what we found with regard to groundwater and soil vapor. As I mentioned before, groundwater is found about 12 to 14 feet below the ground surface. The only contaminants we found in groundwater were consistent with historic fill materials, so SVOCs and metals. We did not find any contaminants of concern related to Newhart. So what are we going to do to deal with groundwater? As Ben mentioned, one of the first things is we're going to build our school, if approved, slab on grade, no basement. This would prevent the need for any sort of dewatering. We try to avoid dewatering whenever possible, and certainly when we have an industrial neighbor or neighborhood, we really try to prohibit it to prevent the possibility of drawing something into our excavation from off-site. Further, groundwater is not used as a source of drinking water in New York City. All of our drinking water comes from the upstate reservoir system. And third, we do have the hydraulic barrier further protecting our site underneath the sidewalk of Franklin and DuPont. That hydraulic barrier has not been necessary to date, but it does provide an extra layer of protection for our site. So the next media we'll talk about is soil vapor. We took soil vapor samples across our site, and we really only found one solvent, PCE, which is not a contaminant of concern for Newhart, and some minor petroleum-related constituents. Our results were similar to other sites across Greenpoint and appear to be typical background. What are we going to do about soil vapor? As is the case with all of our new construction sites, we're going to install a gas vapor barrier below the slab of our building. Gas vapor barrier is essentially a membrane that prevents a phenomenon called vapor intrusion from happening within our building. In addition, we're going to install a subslab depressurization system, which is essentially a network of gravel and piping that provides suction below the slab of the building to prevent vapor intrusion from occurring. We do SSDSs on about probably 75% of the new buildings that we construct. On the right, you'll see pictures of typical subslab depressurization system. These are the fans here, rooftop mounted at one of our recent schools. And these are the alarm panels that we install in the custodian's office, which notify the operator if a fan were to turn off for any reason. So this is a very typical site as far as subsurface conditions. We did not see much change over the 15 years between our two investigations. And our site conditions are very similar to other sites we've investigated across the city and in Greenpoint. All of the actions we're proposing are typical for us as part of standard construction, like clean cover systems, vapor mitigation, dust and sediment control. However, the site is E-designated, which requires the Mayor's Office of Environmental Remediation to oversee the project and approve any remedial actions that we take on the site. Because of the community's concern about this site and its proximity to Newhart, we are proposing to enter our site into the OER's voluntary cleanup program. And with the OER voluntary cleanup program, it provides an extra layer of public participation, including maintaining online report repositories, issuance of fact sheets to a list of stakeholders maintained by OER, announcing our remedial action work plan and a 30-day public comment period minimum, and also fact sheet for the notice of completion once we've completed our site remediation. And we also have the ability to continue to perform these public presentations whenever and wherever the community needs. So this is a flow diagram that OER provides on their website as far as getting through the voluntary cleanup program. We're very much still at the very beginning of this process. We have been for 15 years. We've done this first cell, which is site investigation, but we haven't applied to the VCP yet. We have been awaiting the community's support for this project before we proceed to that next step. But you know, we hope that through this these public presentations we can answer all of your questions regarding this process. turn it back over to Ben, unless you want to go over technical questions now.
I'm not actually seeing hands raised right now. Let's go with Ben and then we'll go through the questions in the Q&A, please.
Okay, thank you. So all this gives us confidence, and we hope that it gives the community the confidence needed for us to go forward with the project. It's important to note the estimated timeline of our typical school build. Our design phase is approximately 1 to 2 years, followed by the 2 to 3 years of construction. The voluntary cleanup program through OER will run in parallel with our design and construction of the new school. That process itself includes robust public participation. Newhart on-site cleanup has now completed, and only off-site NAPL recovery remains at this time. And those residential buildings on Newhart are nearing completion and will be occupied before the construction of our new school begins. We will of course pursue additional community engagement meetings throughout the project. We do appreciate everyone's time today and invite anyone to ask questions. This is my contact information. My email bgoodman@nycsca.org, or you could email greenpointlanding@nycsca.org. And this is a link on our website under Community Environmental Due Diligence to all the documents regarding 257 Franklin Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So Yvette Knight from my team, if you would not mind, please going through the questions in the Q&A. We'll start there and then we'll go to the raised hands, please.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Our first question is, what is the plan to remediate the elevated PFAS found?
Mike, you're muted.
We did not find elevated PFAS. We found typical background conditions. We checked with OER regarding this, and the concentrations we found were consistent with background in the neighborhood. So there is no source of PFAS. Unfortunately, PFAS is one of these things that they're finding in low-level concentrations across even rural areas, it's just sort of present at low levels in communities without there necessarily being an immediate source. So it's not of a concentration that requires remediation, but we just wanted to note it because the state has developed comparison criteria, and we just wanted to point out that we did find some.
Please, if any of the regulators would like to chime in, please just raise your hands. We'll call on you right away. We've got your names on our list over here. Okay, Yvette, any other questions in the Q&A?
Yes, there's a question from Laura Hoffman. It's threefold. It says, you stated that during Sandy, the plume did not move. Is there any baseline for vibration as well, such as earthquake, large boom? So that's the first of three questions.
I don't think that there's any sort of seismic study that's been done. Typically, that would be done as part of a structural analysis for the school. But, in our area, there isn't a big seismic concern, and I wouldn't think that whatever seismic activity could potentially happen in an odd situation that it would really affect the plume dimensions. One of the things that we learned from reading the record of decision associated with the Newhart site is that this material is relatively viscous. We believe, and DEC seems to believe that that during the Newhart operation, they likely heated the phthalates in order to pump them through their industrial process of creating vinyl siding or whatever they were producing on site. And when the release happened to the subsurface, that material was warm and liquid, and as it made its way into the street, through utility corridors. It likely quickly cooled and became more viscous or more jelly in nature. And so I think that's the main reason that the plume hasn't changed over time, is its viscosity. As mentioned, groundwater flows in this direction. So I think that, you know, if it was mobile, you would have seen it moving in this direction, and we have not seen that. So I think this is kind of how it was released when it originally got out, and then it's kind of stayed that way. All of this is obviously gone, and what's remains is the product recovery that the New Heart Responsible Party is implementing now, which involves pumping of this material through a pneumatic system to a holding tank in the basement of the new residential tower, and also involves some vac truck work in the sidewalks as well to recover phthalates, and that work is ongoing.
Next part of the question, also the SCA guarantee. Also, does the SCA guarantee that the plume will not move and the barrier will not fail?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. Does the SCA guarantee that the plume will not move and the barrier will not fail?
I don't think we can guarantee that the plume will not move. It hasn't moved, and the past is usually a pretty good indication. The hydraulic barrier is very robust grout wall. It has, you know, basically serves as a hydraulic barrier. It was installed by the New Heart Responsible Party. Right now it's not really necessary in the sense that the plume has not come into contact with it, but this is an engineering control that will be maintained in perpetuity. So if it ever does, you know, become necessary, I think, you know, reinforcing it or doing additional hydraulic work is a possibility. I would just point to the fact, though, that even if in the very unlikely event that this material started to move again after 70 years for some unknown reason, or maybe, you know, and also in the unlikely event that the hydraulic barrier were to fail for some reason, again, there's no way for people to come into contact with this material. It's not volatile in nature, so it doesn't create a vapor that's a concern for vapor intrusion. It's 12 feet below your feet when you're standing at the sidewalk. So aside from digging a 12-foot hole, you couldn't come into contact with it. And third, we're not drinking groundwater in this part of the state, so there's no way to come in contact with it through drinking water. So even if all of those scenarios were to play out, there is, in my opinion, no exposure potential, which is an important factor when you're evaluating these types of conditions.
And the next question, and is the SCA going to make that guarantee in writing for families that enroll their children in that school?
So I
guess it-
just I want to
Yeah.
jump in here for just a minute because I think, you know, what Mike is saying is exactly right. We think that we have every reason to believe that the wall is doing its job, which isn't necessary at this time based on the dimensions of the plume and how it has not shifted over time. And as far as putting that in writing, we actually have published questions and answers, including questions very much in this vein on our website from the first meeting. So yes, we are willing to put in writing and say to the community that it is our professional opinion that there is no possible exposure pathway for humans to come into contact with the remains of the plume.
I would also add that you know, all of us on this call, including Madison Realty, had nothing to do with the release of this material. We're all trying our level best to address it as efficiently as possible. The New Heart Responsible Party, Madison, took a great risk in acquiring that property and did, in my professional opinion, an incredible job cleaning it up, and they continue to do so. All of us are here to make this this whole situation better. And we're trying our level best to do that. And the people who caused this spill are long gone, and we're all here left to deal with it. And we're going to do everything in our power to make it right.
Another question from Ms. Hoffman. You stated that the school wouldn't have a basement. Where will typical basement equipment, such as the boiler, be located? And how will the SCA ensure safety of those areas?
I love this question. So as Ben said, early on in the presentation, this will be an all-electric school, which means it will not need a boiler in the traditional historic sense of the word, which means that the square footage that will take up for the square footage required for a space like that is significantly smaller than in a building that's taking gas. So we have been building all electric schools for a number of years now. So we have good design expertise on how to locate those rooms within the school, accessed only by the custodian or the principal if need be. And as is the case with a great number of our buildings, particularly since Hurricane Sandy, we try to locate as many of our mechanicals on the roof as we possibly can to ensure that they're up out of the floodplain. And not that we're in a floodplain here, but we do tend to locate lots of our mechanicals, et cetera, on the roof.
There's one other PFAS related question. What are the levels of PFAS found relative to regulatory guidance?
Sure. Andrea, I'm going to share my report with them if that's okay.
Absolutely.
These are the two main PFAS compounds that are regulated in the state of New York.
Mike, can you blow that up a little, please?
Yes, I can try.
Just want to make sure people can see.
Yeah. Bear with me a second here.
While Mike is making this a little bigger, I'll take this moment to note that if folks go to our website under the new schools page, these documents are posted there. So if you'd like to know more details about the PFAS or any of the other contaminants or properties that were found in the soil investigations on our property from 2008 or from 2023, they're both available on our website.
So this is the concentration of PFOA and PFOS shown in the gray boxes. This is a regulatory comparison criteria. You'll see that we're not talking about screaming hot concentrations here. In my experience, I don't think anybody from a remedial standpoint would raise an eyebrow below 100 for these numbers. It's still an emerging science and an emerging situation, but that is my understanding.
Any other questions in the QA?
No, that's it for now.
I don't see lots of hands. Do folks have questions that we can answer? Do any of the regulators or the folks from Madison Realty or any of the elected offices want to say anything? Zach, give me just 1 second. I got you. You should be able to unmute yourself now, Zach.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zach Schreiber from the Office of Environmental Remediation with we're the organization in the city that runs the voluntary cleanup program. And I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that have been said this evening. One, as this project, should it move forward, move through our cleanup program, there will be ample opportunity to dive into these details in more rigor and to understand the designs of the engineering controls that will be constructed at the school and to have in-depth discussions about any of these elements that anybody has. That's really important for us. It's really important for SCA, and That's really built into the program. Also want to express that when a project enrolls in the voluntary cleanup program with OER, by definition, through our memorandum of agreement that we have with the State Department of Environmental Conservation, we consult with the state on the remedies that will be implemented at sites that are in our program. And for this project, we have done a preliminary briefing of the investigation that was conducted by SCA and had a preliminary discussion about the remedial elements, and they match 1-to-1 with what Mike described. And so at this point, we haven't had our formal engagement with the state because this project is still pending, but we are on track to be in line with what the state would look for a site like this. So I think that's helpful for everybody to understand that not only is the city overseeing this work, but upon formal enrollment of this project in the voluntary cleanup program, the state will also be reviewing the documents and bring their expertise of the surrounding area. And in that regard, final note, OER has overseen the redevelopment and remediation at pretty much every site with a new building within half a mile of the site over the last 15 years. I myself, I know a lot of you. I've been involved since the first building at Greenpoint Landing started to go up, and we developed back then the community monitoring plan to make sure that large-scale project had minimal impacts on the community. I think that similarly, DEC took a very proactive approach with Newhart, and the team there delivered. And we had essentially 0 complaints during the remedy. We had so many fewer complaints during the actual remedy than we did leading up to it that it was an enormous relief, and it was a really successful project. So all that to say that we have a great deal of experience working in this very dense neighborhood with an enormous number of remedial projects going on, and for the most part, we have a great ability to stay out of the news, and we can deliver these projects successfully and protective of human health and the environment, and enable these properties to move forward. So we are available for any questions and feedback as well, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Thank you so much, Zach. I actually would love it if you wouldn't mind speaking briefly about some of the PFAS questions that we've seen tonight. I think this is the first time that we're seeing questions in that vein, and it would be great if you could just talk a little bit about what you see on sites across the city, how you recommend tackling that, what families, parents, and community members should be thinking about as it comes to development of sites that have levels of PFAS similar to our property here.
Sure. So PFAS, similar to the phthalates, these are compounds that would be primarily exposed to individuals through ingestion, or potentially through inhalation and dust particles, if the soil were contaminated and dust weren't being controlled properly. So the PFAS here was identified in groundwater. Michael, there were no PFAS in the soil, correct? Or did we analyze for that here?
There were none.
Yeah. So again, similar to the phthalates, the only potential for exposure would be the different scenarios that Michael laid out, and from that perspective, we wouldn't see the need from an e-designation voluntary cleanup program to further remediate the groundwater at the site, because the groundwater is not used as drinking water. The levels here, as Michael said, are very similar to what we see around the city, and the EPA recently released guidelines for drinking water, and those are pretty strict, but those don't apply to this condition. So from a regulatory driver and from an exposure driver perspective, there is not really any action that we would prescribe for those contaminants.
Thank you. I see a Ryan S. with a raised hand. Ryan, if you would like to unmute yourself, please, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm Ryan Shanley. I'm with the North Brooklyn Neighbors. So thanks so much all for answering questions here. It's when Michael talked about the voluntary cleanup program, it sounded like it was, possible here. Um, is it a foregone conclusion? Maybe this is a question for Zach, or what can the neighborhood expect for getting, this school project enrolled in that? And if that does happen, what we can expect in terms of public meetings. You said that was, something like this in an ongoing way as needed as possible, but, what can we expect for that sort of thing going forward? Thank you.
Mike, if you could flip back to that slide on the where we are slide. I will just say the reason that we used the word possible or probable is because we are still determining with all of you and your elected officials if we're going to take those next steps. We really are hopeful that we will be able with all of you for folks to feel comfortable for us to take those next steps, but it is SCA's commitment to all of you that should we move forward with this school, we would absolutely enroll in the VCP. And then I'll let Mike and Zach speak to what those steps look like and what that engagement looks like.
So I'll jump in. So the e-designation program would accomplish all of what we're discussing from a remedial perspective with no difference compared to the voluntary cleanup program. So many sites come to us and elect to move through our program, simply remediating, and they opt to have minimal public involvement. They're building as of right. And so because of that, there's not a requirement on a lot of the sites that are conducting construction across the city to engage in public involvement. The voluntary cleanup program, which is parallel to the designation program, offers some additional benefits, specifically for private developers. They're of interest for city agencies and other entities that have institutional backgrounds. It's a little bit different, but the voluntary cleanup program does able to have those additional benefits does require the option for public participation. Our standard public participation is conducted once we have a full site characterization completed and we have a draft remedial action plan, both of which are captured in 2 documents that are released for public comment. Typically, we receive, if at all, comments digitally, and I would say that since we launched the program in 2010, since then we've probably had public involvement on half a dozen projects where we've had actual in-person meetings, and we definitely are able and willing to do that. And if public comment needs to expand beyond that single incident prior to the approval of the remedial action plan, we can also we can work that out too with SCA and the community. In terms of the ability to enroll in the voluntary cleanup program, our program was designed to make sure that any party that needed remedial oversight from a regulatory entity in the city could come to us. Our bar is significantly lower than the states because of the benefits that one can incur at the state level. And so we take sites that are that exhibit low and moderate levels of contamination, which is a significant majority of sites across the cities because of the city's development history. So this site is eligible for the voluntary cleanup program without any hitches, and it's in discussions with SCA. It was viewed as the best way forward to ensure that there's a formal pathway for public involvement, the overlay of the DEC consultation, and so there's no reason that the project wouldn't proceed that way if the community supports it.
That is definitely our intention. Any other questions from folks? Any questions in the Q&A or any questions in the room?
No other questions in Q&A at this time.
Okay. I certainly don't want to cut this short. For folks from the community, you've got a lot of people here who can answer all the questions. So please, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Again, if there's any elected official or staff member from any elected office or anyone from the developer teams present or any of the regulatory agencies present who would like to say something, please raise your hand. We are here for you. Great. Angela, we will get your mic unmuted just in one moment, and then Elon, we will get to you next. Angela, I think you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate everyone for coming. Our office, as well as Assemblymember Gallagher's office and State Senator Kristen Gonzalez's office, will all be tracking community feedback and input. So for now, feel free to just email us your comments, and we'll be tracking that on our end.
Thank you. Elon Silver. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you, Andrea. Just to echo what Angela just said, my name is Elon. I am counsel with Senator Gonzalez's office. I also live quite close to the site, so great to hear the developments that are happening here. But just to echo what Angela said, we're really pleased about the public communication on these plans and that some of the concerns are being addressed. We will be on the lookout for any public comments, and we will work, of course, with the entire group to help resolve them. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Any other? Angela, you still have your hand raised. Do you have another? No. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Could I just say one more thing?
Yes, of
I think it's important to emphasize that we've said a few times that the remedy at Newhart is essentially complete, but there is residual contamination. So I think it's really important to discuss the what's happening going forward. We participate in semi-monthly, every 2 weeks we get on the phone with the team from DEC and the Newhart redevelopment team. And we heard today from them that they're currently in the process of finalizing their site management plan. That means, and this is something that the school site would also have, should it be completed. Any site that has ongoing remedial requirements or has engineering controls that would mitigate potential exposure to residual contamination at a site has a site management plan. That means that these sites are not simply walked away from. The regulators are there still, and they're ensuring that the owners and operators of the property continue to maintain the engineering controls that were put in place. In the case of the Newhart, there's active remediation going on through the collection systems. There's active monitoring going on in the intersection and then the monitoring wells and the sidewalks around the site. There's active remediation to the north of the site where there's a different set of issues that are being managed. So this site will be managed actively indefinitely. And to the questions that Laura was raising, the folks at Madison and the folks at DEC, the folks at Haley Aldrich are going to be having these calls for quite some time to continue to verify that conditions remain as was projected, and that the systems that are managing those the conditions are being managed effectively, and that they're continuing to remediate as was designed. So I think that's really important too, that this is going to be a corner of Greenpoint that will be under ongoing scrutiny and a high level dense data collection effort. And there's not really, we're not going to have eyes off of this site. So I think that's really important to understand, that we're not simply stopping what's going on. It's something that's going to continue. It'll be at a much lower level. It'll be for the most part invisible, which will be a welcome change. I can only imagine for folks who live nearby. And should the school begin construction in 4 or 5 years, or complete construction in 4 or 5 years, then this periodic management, perhaps around a monthly frequency, would be all that would be left above ground that would be seen of this ongoing remediation.
Thank you, Zach. Just to add to what you said, the engineering controls that were installed as part of New Hart, including the hydraulic barrier in the sidewalk adjacent to our school site, are also certified on an annual basis as part of that site management phase as well. So one of the previous comments was, how can you guarantee that these systems are maintained in perpetuity? The site management program is essentially how that's done. An engineer has to certify each year that all engineering controls continue to operate as designed, and that is reported to the state every year in perpetuity.
Any other questions, comments, feedback, requests? So we will once we end this meeting, we will process this recording. We will put it on our website. We will aggregate the questions that have been received here tonight and answers, and we will publish that on our website as well. Can we navigate to the last slide, please? This link that's on our website is where you can get the environmental documents, this presentation, the video from the first Zoom. You'll get the video from this Teams meeting. You'll get the Q&A from the December 19th meeting. You'll get the Q&A when it's ready from last week's community board meeting, from tonight's meeting. And you can please email Ben Goodman directly at this link, or you can contact us at greenpointlanding@nycsca.org with your questions. And otherwise, we will hope to be in contact with your elected officials within the next few weeks as we hope to take steps forward here. But please, if you have any comments that you'd like to share with us afterwards, please reach out. We're available to answer any questions that you might have on anything related to this site. We're hopeful that we'll be able to go forward here. We love building a new school. So I want to thank everyone for your attendance this evening very much. And we will be in contact again soon. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.